Matt Brunnig, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Will.
Matt, you bought a niche manufacturer back in 2018. It was quite a small business, but it was also one stoplight away from your home. We'll get there. We're also going to learn about the concept of searcher in residence. I'm very excited about this. And we'll bring on your own SIR, Kevin Peer, at the back half of the interview to explore this with us. And finally, Matt, you are an LP in our fund, Minds Capital. Thank you for your support in that. Been great to have you along. There's a lot to get to. Let's get to it. Matt, start us off with why you turned your attention to wanting to buy a business in the first place.
Sure. I don't remember why I first wanted to buy a business. It was back in 2011, I believe, that I first looked around at buying one, and I don't remember what the catalyst was in particular for purchasing a business or where I got the information. But I've known since I was young that I've wanted to run a business. I've known that I wanted to build something, and I always thought that it would be something that I created. So growing up, I thought that I would be a private inventor. That was really what I thought I'd want to be. That's why I went and did engineering in school. And eventually I realized that starting something up was going to be very expensive and time consuming with at best, low-ish rate of success. So I decided that it would make a lot more sense to purchase a business and kind of jump in midstream. And then later on, I could fold in creating something if time allowed.
It's interesting, Matt, an inventor, the kind of one of the core reasons for ETA is for people who have the entrepreneurial energy, but maybe not the idea. And it sounds like you maybe weren't lacking for an idea, but you just thought that the path to success would be more likely buying something that already existed, already had some product market fit, already had some revenue, and pouring your creativity into that already existing entity and being creative within a business that already existed.
Yeah, absolutely. So the initial jump was, I was in mid-career. I was 10 years in. I was a senior project manager for a company that rebuilt power plants. By the time I bought, sorry, I'm jumping ahead a few years, but I realized that I needed to maintain some income. I was looking to start a family, and it was very clear that stopping and trying to start something up was not going to keep income coming in. So buying a business at that point was extremely clear as the best opportunity.
But you were not somebody who was in or around ETA, had heard about it in school, was going down the rabbit hole. This was all, you were one of my few guests who kind of comes to the conclusion on their own that buying a business makes sense.
Yeah, I wish I could remember exactly how it clicked in my mind and the process or the direction that it came into me from. But I know that as early as 2011, it was clear that was a good option. And then by the time I bought in 2018, jumping ahead a little, it was even more clear. So yeah, I'd had no experience with the ETA community. I just did undergrad engineering. So I didn't go to business school or anything like that. So I wouldn't have heard it there.
You said a line in our pre-call, Matt, that struck me about the two loves of your life. Share that with the audience. You've already mentioned what one of them is, building. But say the line.
Oh, baseball.
Yeah,
I loved building
baseball
and baseball.
Building.
Yep.
Yeah.
Baseball was the core of my life. I would say up until very near the end of college. I hurt my shoulder and elbow actually partway through college, and it became clear that was unlikely to be a career path like I had intended. And so I still love it, but it's not a career.
Yeah, but building is.
Building is, yeah, absolutely. I did want to jump back to one thing you mentioned a bit earlier, where there was the concept of a lot of people that come into ETA think that they might not be the idea guys. And I've heard that before. It does not match me at all. I'm probably too much of an idea guy. It's very easy for me to want to run with a new idea a day. And a lot of the team's job here is to help kind of keep me corralled and focused on the few things we're actually able to do at a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ah, great. Good call out. Well, so it comes on you come to the conclusion on your own that buying a business is something that intrigues you that you'll likely want to do back in 2011. But you don't do it then. Why don't you do it then?
Basically, I would say I got scared. I could not determine with certainty that it was going to be successful. I did not have any encouragement from my family. They saw that I had a solid career and, was quote unquote doing well. And so between the two of them, I just couldn't come to a point where I thought, hey, this is definitely a good idea and going to work. And I was right. It's never definitely going to work, but I think that I solidly underestimated the chance of it working when you buy a good operating business. It has a very high probability of success if you don't go breaking things.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think changed about that fear factor between then and a few years later when you did get serious and committed to the idea?
I would say that my threshold for acceptable risk came down. So I was looking for something that was, let's call it 98% or 100%. I could be 100% confident or 98% confident would succeed. And as time went on, I realized that if one can be that confident, they're probably already too late to whatever it is. So I moved my threshold down consciously to be somewhere in the 80% confidence range. So some of that comes, I believe, from the military. I think that they tend to say somewhere when you have 70% of the information, it's time to move. Mm-hmm. And that really clicked for me when I realized that I was never going to have all the information. I was never going to be fully confident, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. I feel like that's another way of talking about risk and reward. So if there is no risk, like you said, if you actually found something where with a 98% chance of 98% confidence in its success or 100%, then there's probably no juice in the trade.
There isn't.
So there's no risk, there's no reward. So what you look for, of course, is the sweet spot of there's always going to be some risk. But the sweet spot is a little enough risk with enough reward. And in your own mind, that was 80% certainty that buying a business could pan out.
Yeah. And as we grow, it could even potentially come down just a hair as each individual deal becomes a little less critical to the success of the whole. There's one kind of a tidbit that helps with that for me personally, and that is that in a business, you have good and bad and known and unknown. Essentially, you have 4 quadrants, right? And it's pretty easy to get comfortable or uncomfortable with the known good and the bad, which leaves you with the known and the unknown good and bad. And one thing that helps me think about that is it feels like you're 50-50 at that point, right? You don't know what's going to happen in the future. But the truth of the matter is, as a business operator, you help create reality. Reality doesn't just happen to you. So you're able to split and make some less of that bad happen and cause more of the good to happen. So it's not really a 50-50 unknown. I would say it's something more like 75 positive to 25 negative.
Great point. The difference between an active investment and a passive investment. If you're buying a stock, it's totally out of your hands which direction it goes. But in active business ownership, we are talking about being able to influence the future. Helping the odds.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. And I mean, even today, sometimes I have to remember that we create reality here. Things might feel sometimes like they're imposed on us, but the great majority of the time, there's a reality to be created depending on what actions we're able to take.
Okay, Matt. So let's get into the year is now what when you get serious about this project of buying a business.
So yeah, let's see. I would say it was probably early 2017 that I got to be serious. So I was pretty burnt out. I was working 90-hour weeks. I don't know if you're familiar with how power plant turnarounds work, but it's 24/7 with $250,000 a day liquidated damages. And when you're in the lead of that, every second counts. So really stressful. I learned a great deal doing it, but I was done. I was tired. I was ready to move on. And for me, just as importantly, I was ready to start looking to settle down, have a family. And that all came down to either I would find another job or buy a business. I mean, I'm sure there are other options, but those were the two that I saw at that time. And buying a business was very clearly the direction I wanted to go.
So you were embarking on a search to find a business and a mate at the same time?
Yes. I wouldn't say I booked it as a search, but you know what? I was pretty serious. I was ready to settle down.
Okay. And so what did your search, not for a mate, but for a business, look like?
Well, for me, it was very local. I lived here. I liked my house.
Where is here?
Pinellas Park, Florida. So just outside of St. Pete. I enjoy planting, so I've got a lot of tropical fruit trees. I'd already planted these at my house. I didn't want to move and wait for tropical fruit trees to grow at a new place. And I really like the area. I mean, it's a beautiful place to be. I went to BizBuySell. I think I used maybe BizQuest back then a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to a few brokers, but not nearly as seriously as I would do in the future. So it was very much see a business that could be interesting on BizBuySell and ask to see more information and review it and see if I wanted to buy it.
And so you did not quit to go search, which is probably part of the fact that you weren't being influenced by all the ETA kind of best practices or books where it's kind of, you'll hear a lot, about the idea of doing a full-time search. You were keeping your eye on the listing sites online, and when and if something came up that interested you, you would go after it and then quit your job.
Correct. And I was a little more limited than the average person searching because power plant rebuilds tend to be, out of town 90, 100 hours a week, all of the spring and all of the fall. Oh. So I really only had a small window in the winter or the summer to do anything local to search. So I was a little bit more aggressive that summer because I knew I was serious and I would lose the next 3 months once it hit about, I think, September of that year.
And so what did you see? Did you feel like you were seeing decent options on BizBuySell?
I would say it was not great. It was better. It's probably better then than it is today. It's getting even tighter to find decent businesses on something like a BizBuySell. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of luck finding anything else interesting. So this one kind of jumped out at me after I looked at it. Not initially, strangely enough.
Well, right. It sat, or it had been sitting. Yes. You had actually seen it in your BizBuySell screening and not double clicked for a while. So how did that go?
So I thought it was mentioned sewing and marine, and I thought it was like a local canvas shop. So those tend to be one-off project-based businesses, and they tend to rely on someone very knowledgeable in the business to run it. So I just skipped it, but I don't know, probably the third or fourth time I saw it, I recognized something in the picture that it was very local to me. And I thought, well, it's, I think, 1.5 miles from my house, maybe 1.25 miles. And so I decided I'd go take a look. Just why not? It's right there.
And what was the description? What was this business? If it wasn't whatever you said, a local canvas shop, it was what?
So it ended up that this business, the first business that we bought was Sunrise Yacht Products, and they are a specialized manufacturer of tension nets that go on the front of sailing catamarans, and then have expanded somewhat to making the same type of product for architectural use. Like, think a really large daybed built into the dock or a villa in the Maldives. So it's big with resorts. Okay. So, yeah, they had a worldwide brand recognition. They shipped all over the world. They shipped to OEM boat makers in Vietnam and South Africa. And so, it turned out they had a lot of positives and they had a solid niche built out.
And so you go to visit the business, and what do you find there? How big a business is it? Give us a kind of a sense of the look and feel.
Yeah, it was at the time, I think, about 5,000 square feet, 5 employees plus the owner, doing I believe it was about 670,000 revenue, and about somewhere between 170 and 200 of SDE, depending on the year.
So that, as you now know, and listeners will know, that's a pretty small business. So 5 employees plus owner, less than well under $1 million in revenue, and 170 to 200 in SDE. We'll assume you're going to tell us that you were going to use a loan to buy this business, an SBA loan, which would cut that SDE in half roughly. So was this going to, I assume if you're a key engineer at power plant reconstruction, you're probably making a really strong full salary. This was not going to replace that, at least day one. Talk us through how you thought about the numbers of this opportunity.
Sure. So it definitely was not going to replace my salary if I projected it out, without substantial growth. Let's say it stayed steady, it would cut my salary just over in half. But the way I looked at it was, one, I was ready to move out of what I was doing. I was ready to settle down. And I knew that I was going to have to take a pay cut to make the jump unless I wanted to continue doing the same type of thing I was doing. So the way I modeled it out is I would probably take a hit for something along the lines of 2 years and then get back to somewhere in the range of where I was. And I was okay with that to get a base and get started. I know in our pre-call, I'd mentioned that I was looking to replace my salary, and that is true, but I was looking to grow well beyond that with time. The corporation that we started, the parent company was, I say we, it was me, Octal Ventures. And the reason for that is I think octopus are really cool. And 2, I envisioned us getting to something like having 8 businesses. So and that was
when was that vision, Matt? That the holdco vision, was that later or was that right out of the gate?
I don't think I knew it as holdco at the time, but I knew that for it to be large enough to really be interesting and take on some interesting challenges, that we had to grow. And I envisioned it by either starting or buying additional businesses. At some point, I didn't have a very strict structure. I wasn't beholden to any investors, but I did see it going in that direction, which is why I called it Octal Ventures.
Okay. All right. So it is doing 200 or less than SDE. You calculate that buying this business is going to mean taking home half as much income as you're taking at your W-2. That'll last a couple of years. Hopefully, the plan is to grow the business such that you get back to your W-2 level income. And then, of course, keep growing it and eventually supersede your W-2 income,
yes.
At least either in this business or with the acquisition of others. So your long-term plan is to be earning something significantly more than you were at W-2, which does not differentiate you. That is what most people are hoping, right? Did I get that right?
That's definitely correct. I think what I didn't have is a particular idea, like a number that I wanted to get to, which would have been useful, I think, at that time to say, hey, like I'm going to start, cutting my salary down to 100. Eventually I want the SDE to be at least $1 million or something like that. It was very much a organic, there will be room to grow. Let's see what we can do, as opposed to having a fixed path or plan in front of me, which actually would have been useful looking back. Yeah,
sure. Although I will say I liked the adventurous spirit of this. It was a little bit more of like, maybe you didn't realize it at the time, but you were taking a lot of risk buying such a small business. There's a lot, and in fact, we're going to get to it, but you would now not buy such a small business. You are not on the buy small tip. I'm putting words in your mouth. Go ahead.
It would not be my lead. I recommend for people to buy substantially larger if they can. So there's two caveats. There are two ways to think about it. One is that it's better. I would say what I did, given the situation, was a good move. It was better to start and get to moving and then be able to swerve or adjust or grow further than to sit on my hands and wait for the perfect thing to come along, which in my case, it never would have with the limited time I had to search for something.
Yeah.
So if that's the opportunity, it's still a good opportunity, but I would recommend if you have the chance to buy something at least 500 SDE, preferably 600 or 700 SDE, it will make things easier for you. I ended up wearing quite a few hats, and I still wear a few more than I want to.
Well, and what regular listeners will know is that we can have these perfect criteria and then not ever find that perfect business. And then you start adjusting some of those criteria down and you decide what you're willing to compromise on. And usually size is one of those things. So despite the fact that we're talking ideals here, and it's actually increasingly rare to find the businesses of that ideal size. You were going to say?
Yeah. Oh, well, it's definitely increasingly difficult. I'm looking for them now. But one other thought that I think would have been valuable to me at that time was that I was doing an SBA loan. So my downside with a personal guarantee is bankruptcy.
Yeah.
That when your downside is bankruptcy, buying bigger, there is no more risk. Your risk is bankruptcy, period. So as long as you have a large portion of the capability to run something larger, buy as big as you can and maximize what you can buy through the SBA, because you're either bankrupt or you're not. It's binary, and you just increase your expected value if you're buying larger.
Exactly. It's asymmetric to your point. It's asymmetric. Great point, Matt. It's asymmetric in the sense that the downside is the same no matter size of business that you buy. No matter what, it's bankruptcy. Yep. Full stop. So why not increase the potential rewards to yourself by buying something bigger? There's no penalty to get. It's rare that you can find a trade where the rewards go up, but the risk remains the same.
Yeah.
And the other thing to say about, or just to emphasize here about this business, Matt, is how close it was to you. Now, it's hard to quantify the value of that, but it's tremendously valuable. And in fact, so how far away was it? What's your commute look like?
I think I measured it at 1.35 miles from my house, maybe 1.4. So it was one stoplight, but they built a second one since. So it's now two stoplights. Yeah. That was very valuable for me.
And as I would think it would be for anybody. Of course, you were looking to settle down, as you said. So you were very focused on finding something very local. So even more valuable for you. But anybody would like a business where, in theory, you could walk to work on a nice day. I mean,
I never have, but I could.
Spoken like a true Floridian.
Yes.
So back to the business itself. It's a manufacturer of these canvas of netting for catamarans, and then for what did you call them? Bed? What was the bed?
It's a tension netting. So yeah, it's like a built-in day bed that goes into some resorts or to home backyards. So imagine you build a hole in your dock, an opening in your dock, and you put a catamaran net in that space.
Yeah.
So it's it just got a ton of benefits over other types of beds. It's breathable. It holds up a lot longer. It never gets soaked with water. So on hot days, you're laying on it. It's super comfortable because you're over the cooling effect of the water.
Fantastic. And so these were products that were manufactured, so a true manufacturer, as opposed to what you thought it was when you first saw it on BizBuySell, which was like a custom shop. This is something that's and it had a reputation, and in fact, an international reputation.
So I would go through the sailing forums and try to see what their brand reputation was, and they were head and shoulders above anything else. They were the most expensive in the market, but they're for just a good example, your standard net on let's say $1 million catamaran from the factory is going to last maybe 3 years in the tropics, sometimes 4. And the reputation of this company was that the nets it was making as aftermarket replacements were lasting 12 years, 13 years. So it was a head and shoulders difference between everything else.
Love to see a strong brand. Love to see international clientele. You might say to yourself, well, this business, if it already has an outsized brand for such a little operation, maybe it has already grown into what it can possibly be. How did you convince yourself that there was more growth to be had in this market or for this business?
So one portion of it was that the owner was on the older side. He was in his 60s, and it was pretty clear he was ready to retire. And it seemed that he was running it as a lifestyle business as opposed to really pushing for everything he could. An obvious sign was, I believe, ad spend was under $1,000 a year. So, he wasn't going to any trade shows. He wasn't doing any type of ad spend. It was very much, we make great products and they sell themselves. And when someone calls in, we will sell them their net. So I was pretty sure that by putting some effort in that, in some ads and some marketing, maybe going to some trade shows, that we could start to increase sales. I could also look at the sales revenue and I could see roughly how many catamarans were in existence in the world, and see that we were in, maybe at the time, I would guess 10 to 15% of the catamarans out there. And with a premium product, I was pretty sure that along with some ad spend, we could substantially increase that. There were also strong tailwinds for catamarans as a thing. They were the catamaran market has been growing steadily for the last 15 years now, so maybe 6 or 7 years at the time.
Matt, I feel like 10 to 15% market penetration is pretty high.
Well, we are in a very small pond. There's a couple other manufacturers. There's sort of 1.5 in the States, and then there's at the time I bought, there was really only 1 or 2 overseas of any size or substance.
Okay.
And yes, 10 to 15% is, for most markets, probably very high penetration. But when you're in something as small as we are, and there's as few competitors, I believed, and it turned out to be correct, that there was a fair bit of room to grow that.
Okay. And what was there a vision to design and produce adjacent products into the same market? Classic playbook in manufacturing, where you have channels, you have a market presence, you have brand. So come up with new products and sell more but different products to the same market.
That would have been a great idea, Will. We came to that in the last about year and a half. I've actually still got my original business plan for the SBA on the wall, and I've gone through it. And our focus was going to be building out the architectural side of it. So there was all of the non-resort architectural netting was happening purely by chance. Someone happened to think that they would be a cool idea and contact us and say, hey, could you build a net for my dock? So our initial conscious efforts were, in terms of growth, were to focus on getting the backyard dock net out there as a concept. So I ended up going through Pinterest and other similar things to try and spread that. But no, I should have absolutely spread and done more in adjacent catamaran space. So yeah, that's getting to really last summer before we get to that point.
Okay, Matt. Well, can you tell us what the terms of the deal are now? We've talked about your SBA loan, but let's hear the numbers if you could share.
Yeah, it was, I believe it was $470 for the business. We put on, I think it was 40 or 45,000 of working capital. I did a standard 7A loan. I say a standard 7A loan. There was a wrinkle to it. I did use the Rob's rollover. So I used some of my 401k to purchase the business. So my 401k owns a majority of the company, and I own personally a minority. Yeah.
Was there any seller financing?
Yes. I forget if it was 5 or 10%.
Okay.
There was a seller note paid year 2 through 5.
Okay. So on standby for the first year, and then
first 2 years for that one, I believe. Yeah.
Oh, for the first 2 years.
I guess start of year 3 through end of year 5 was the payout.
Great. And the $45,000 in working capital, and then your equity 10%. So 47 plus 45. So you had to bring about $100,000 yourself.
Correct. Yep.
And you tapped your Robs for that.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
For a majority of that.
Okay. We might return to the Robs, because now it's a bit of an albatross. I'm putting words in your mouth. You'll let us know.
Sure.
Great. Okay. Anything more to say about the deal itself, or pretty straightforward?
I would say pretty straightforward, well, so a important point that I actually ended up learning later is I ended up coming in on a Monday morning for the turnover meeting and happened to go by a great local bakery and grab a dozen donuts. And about 4 years later, I found out that one of the key employees, who today runs one of our businesses, would have left that day if I hadn't brought donuts. They'd had a really bad experience in a different job with ownership transition, and the small, I guess, gesture of showing that I cared a little bit made a really big difference. And they brought that up to me years later.
Isn't that, I find that actually so valuable that such a small gesture went so far. So yeah, great learning. And so you brought a dozen donuts to your day one speech, essentially?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Led with, enjoy the donuts, and we're going to chat a little bit.
Okay. Well, anything more other than the donuts, which were, the best $19 you ever spent.
For sure.
Anything more to say about that moment? I mean, five people, very small head count. It's an intimate business. It's just you and half a dozen other people on your day one speech. What's that feel like?
Oh, it's scary. I mean, there's no question about it, because when you're that small, every single person is critical, and they were all critical, and all of them are still here today.
Wow.
With the exception of there was a receptionist that retired. I mean, your entire financial future is on the line, because I don't know how to make nets. I have no idea how to make nets. The owner will teach me enough, but I'm never going to replace these people. I mean, there was the amount of experience in that room, and net making was actually pretty substantial. There were quite a few people with over 5 years, a couple with over 10, I believe, at that time. So it was scary. The main thing I wanted to do was, it's pretty much the standard playbook, and that is, you're coming in not to change. So even to this day, when my commitment to the employees is, if we're making change, it should be either neutral or to their benefit. I'm never trying to make a change that is going to be negative to the employees. And I think communicating that early on is very, very important, as long as it's true. But that is our ethos here, so it is completely true.
And was your message that crisp on day one, that there would be no changes?
I think it was. I did not sleep terribly well that entire previous week trying to figure out what I was going to say. So, I think we closed Friday afternoon, and then it was, all right, well, this is real now, and I've got to figure this out. So I know I wrote and rewrote that multiple times trying to prepare for it.
Yeah.
And that initial communication is everything.
And what about the fact that there is so much institutional knowledge locked up in the heads of five people? You are an engineer, so you probably are more adept at learning a manufacturing business than somebody who's not an engineer. How much did you anticipate actually having to learn or choosing to learn?
So I was intentional in not taking on the skill set of being an industrial sewer. I did not want to learn that, because I knew enough at that time to know that was too much head in the sand. That would have my head down too much.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking over the previous owner's role, which was, let's call it lead business and engineer. So everything to do with purchasing, everything to do with quote unquote finance at that size, and all customer interactions that were having to do with non-standard technical type of potential problems. That was a little easier actually than I expected, because I think I've heard this on a bunch of your previous podcasts, but people do tend to think it's going to be a little harder to pick up the basics of the business than it is. And for us, I think by week 3, I didn't want him coming in every day. And we kind of tapered back to once a week, and then just by phone. And fantastic guy. He's retired and does. I wish I could share what he's doing woodwork now on his own, and just an incredible skill level. He's very dedicated to quality. So he said he made a great base of building quality products for us.
Anything to say about the first 6 months in your business before we turn our attention to how it's gone and what has happened since?
Well, somewhere about a month before I purchased the business, I ended up meeting my wife while I quit my job December, I think 31st. And I met her sometime playing beach volleyball sometime in, I think, February, and we closed in March. So we ended up just being volleyball partners for about 6 or 7 months, but now we're married and just had our first kid.
Good. Congratulations, Matt. That's awesome. And you seem to be pretty adept at searching. Both of these searches kicked off and worked out. You lined up the timing nicely. You know, your business is a mile and a half away. I mean, it all really tied up nicely.
Yes, I would change some things about my business search, but nothing about the marriage search.
Great. At what point did you start to feel that this was in fact a very small business, and buying something bigger, if a searcher would be like what you'd recommend? How did the small size start to make itself felt by you?
Sure. So it was gradual. We grew so rapidly that and demand was increasing substantially. So meeting demand and matching the company growth was a large part of my focus for 4 or 5 years probably. But I would say by year, I bought another business, I think 18 months after, a little one that we bolted on that we can go into if you want. But somewhere around year 3 or 4, I was actively looking to find another business to buy and put an operator in place. And that's been an ongoing search. We were under LOI a couple times and they fell through. So I knew I wanted to have a part in running a substantially larger business from, let's say, year 3 on. I think a lot of that was because my previous background, I was very good at project management. I think I was very good at project management, but I didn't have really any P&L management for a business. I could manage a project's cost, but P&L is a little bit different. And also, I didn't really do much of the hiring and firing as a project manager. I had people that handled that for me. So I kind of had to learn a lot. I started feeling comfortable about myself as a business manager somewhere in that time range and believing that it could scale substantially.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't something where you felt pretty quickly like, wow, I'm wearing so many hats and this thing is held together with barbed wire and string.
Looking back, it sort of was, but it was very much held together by the people here. Like we have a fantastic team. I could not say enough about them. They took care of things. They have a ton of passion for what they do. So they're making sure stuff is good multiple times over before it's ever an issue for me. That helped a lot. Like absolutely a business that size it could have been a lot more terrifying than it was.
Yeah.
The other side of that is growth came so easily that was more of the focus. And it was just, hey, let's keep this train going. Let's keep this snowball building.
So let's turn our attention to that growth now. How was it that growth was coming so readily? Was it something you were doing, or was it the market pulling it out of you?
It was both. So getting out and doing some advertising certainly helped some. Let's see, I bought in 2018. We grew, I want to say, right about 20% year over year for the first 5 years. Which is about the edge of what I think we could. I mean, we're doing this organically. We're not taking in any investment, and I'm still wanting to take something out to pay myself. So we were on the edge of what I think was sustainable for a self-funding growth. Tailwinds really kicked in with COVID. That was and remained a wild time, but demand substantially increased starting probably 2 months after COVID. It really started. COVID hit. So COVID hit March something really?
March 2020. So that would have been right at your 2-year mark of ownership.
So we were definitely growing up until then. And that was through advertisement, some advertisement, having really good quality products, and some of it was just getting interesting pictures out on Pinterest so people could picture this thing they didn't know existed and now say, hey, oh, that's a cool thing that maybe I could put in my backyard. So it was growing in that, but then COVID really kicked things to another gear. And I think we had more work than we could handle for somewhere between 2 and 3 years post-COVID.
Yeah. And obviously there, the effect was people turning their attention to outdoor living, hobbies. Yes. And so very clear beneficiary of that would be catamaraning.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I'd mentioned that we purchased another small business, and that business made pan rack baking covers. So like if you go to a supermarket and there's an aluminum pan rack, they might have bread proofing in it or cooling slightly, or it might just be keeping this cover serves to help maintain the environment inside, but it also helps to keep out contaminants. And so a portion of that business also supplied covers that went to hospitals. And that portion of the business actually covered us for the very, very slow about 6 weeks post-COVID because the hospital business grew quickly for the covers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But Matt, just going back to pre-COVID, so you were able to grow the business 20% year over year by just doing some pretty straightforward marketing stuff. Because that says a lot about the potential of this business, that you didn't have to do anything too non-obvious or Herculean to see significant growth. And in fact, that it was totally in line with your prediction. Turn on a little marketing and grab market share.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the key takeaways there is to buy from someone who's on the more tired side of things, someone who's very clearly ready to retire and maybe a little tired of the day-to-day. I think prior to me, my understanding, I didn't know it at the time, was he was putting in closer to 30 hours a week. And even that time, I think, was only active maybe 20 hours a week here. He'd do other stuff around the shop. Like I said, he was a woodworker, and he'd sometimes find some projects to do. So that left what I believe to be a lot of low-hanging fruit or demand that wasn't capitalized on. So I was more willing to take on perhaps a difficult project than he would have wanted to. I took on a few one-offs, and I was willing to spend more time and more effort, and that, with the quality of product, worked to create some pretty quick growth. I wish that was recreatable in all cases.
Yeah. Well, and when you put it that way, that is quite a common pattern where seller, previous owner says no to a lot of things because they're comfortable. And you as new owner come in hungry, looking to grow, and say yes to everything, or at least say yes to a lot more. And naturally then grow. The key there, of course, is that it is a business with demand. And so, and kind of trying to understand that and tease that out during the search process or during the diligence process. Is there more demand there than the business is choosing to serve because the seller is comfortable? Would be the question, figuring that out.
Yeah, I would almost go to the heuristic of if you're pretty confident that you're buying from someone who's older and tired and a good person, an honest person, you could take that. Just assume rule of thumb, there's going to be opportunities there. We've bought 3 businesses now, and 2 were from sellers like that, and that was true. And 1 was from a younger, more active seller, and that was not as good of a purchase.
Yeah, and I want to double click on that in just a second, Matt. But why don't we though quickly hear about these 2 businesses? You've told us about the one, sure, but give us, if you could, the numbers around it and so on, and then we'll hear about acquisition number 3.
Okay. Well, you thought the first business was small. The second one was, I think it was doing just under 150,000 of revenue a year for these pan rack covers, and it was I want to say a 74-year-old guy and a seamstress making these out of a warehouse in South Florida, and we bought the business. It was, I think, 70,000 SDE, but he was working daily on this. So we paid, I think it was right at, it might have been 100 even. He was working daily on it, meaning he was working full time to generate 70,000 in SDE. Correct. Yeah. Now I'd seen what he was doing. He was hand cutting everything. There was no tools, but yeah, it's tiny business.
And also, it sounds like not profitable, essentially, when factoring in his time.
Correct. I had a bit of a side goal with it, and that is that we had some seasonality in the business that we were in. And there were a lot of standardized products in the business that he was in. So I was going to be able to balance out the seasonality and create what I would call buffer projects. So when we were slower, we could theoretically build more of these covers and then ship them during the busy season.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why it ended up penciling for me, because I had unused capacity during our slow periods that could essentially be nearly free to make these covers.
Okay. And so that's $70,000 of SDE in his case, which he was living on, essentially his salary, could actually be net new EBITDA for real profit for you.
Correct. A decent portion. I think when I penciled it in, I thought it was about a 2-year payback. So I thought we could actually get profits in the range of 50 a year with a little bit of work. I also saw a lot of inefficiencies in how things were being done. So we added some automation, and cutting and processing time got reduced by a factor of 80%, 90%.
And the product is trays in, imagine as you said, like a cart, like a steel cart with like where you put in the trays to move them down the hall. And this covers those, whatever the contents of those trays are.
Yeah, it's usually aluminum in the industry, and it's some sort of a vinyl cover that the front maybe zips up or has Velcro, but it's going to be rectangular. It's going to be, let's say 2 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep and 6 feet tall, and there might be 50 very slight variations on that, a few inches wider, taller, smaller, etc. But
it goes over the entire thing. I was envisioning it going over a tray. Okay, it goes over the entire thing.
The entire rack. So now a bug can't fly up and land on a piece of bread. Or if you put it over your bread out of the oven, it doesn't cool too fast and it has a better consistency.
Okay, great. Wow. What a niche.
It was tiny.
Yeah. And how'd you find that one? Through the grapevine? Also local?
I think that was BizBuySell again. That was a few hours away, actually. I went down there and packed it up with some. I think the owner found a few kids to help load everything in a U-Haul, and I drove it back here one day. Then he came up and showed us how to do the stuff for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we're off to the races.
And the it is whatever machine he used to build these.
You really just sewing. So he hand cut everything. So. And all his equipment, all his sewing machines were really old. We use all high-end Jukis here, which is a well-known Japanese-made sewing machine brand. It sews faster. It's a much better machine. The automation and process of cutting was the biggest win to be had there, along with just being able to fulfill what the customers wanted much faster, and that ended up helping growth happen quickly.
And how did that business grow? How did it do?
It went from 150 to, I think it was just a hair under 600 last year. So that was basically, I think it sold November of 19. Yeah. So it's a substantial growth. I think it's close to 25% year over year. I'd have to run the numbers exactly.
Fantastic. And then business number 3.
Business number 3. So we were in the sewing business with these 2 other businesses. So I've got an alert set. So show me if any businesses pop up with sewing in them. And I wanted a product, something that made semi-custom or semi-custom products in sewing with some level of production. So not one-offs. And we ended up getting a golf seat cover manufacturer. They were in the Mideastern seaboard at the time. They'd been showing really solid growth through COVID, and that's probably one of the areas I went wrong in buying. So it sold for, I think it was $400. We did a pretty standard 7A loan on that. It was doing sold for $400. It was doing about $700 in revenue. estimated it was doing about 170 in SDE based on the seller's numbers. So it seemed like a pretty decent multiple with a growth trajectory. And I liked it. We were really busy. I probably could have due diligenced a little bit better. So the issues that I think came from that, and right now it's like a little better than a break-even business. It's paying off its loan plus a little bit more, but it's not, I wouldn't call it a win. And lessons learned there were mainly, I should have taken a little bit more account of the COVID tailwinds, because so much demand, I think, shifted forward from COVID that we're on the backside of that now. So we're actually seeing a decrease in demand. Revenues dropped a little bit.
Yeah.
The other is, I believe the seller was doing more than I penciled in. So, one, he was an extremely fast seller. He was an extremely efficient worker. So I think in a given hour, he did the work of 2 normal people. And kind of makes sense. He's an owner with a younger guy with a fair bit of energy. So I should have just went ahead and assumed that was the case and adjusted my offer accordingly. And if I didn't win, I didn't win.
Yeah. Well, I like this concept, Matt, of seller hours like dog years. So dog years are 7 human years. And we should think about seller hours in the same way. If a seller
100%.
reports working 10 hours a week in the business, first of all, there's 2 things there. The first is they're probably understating how many hours they're working in the business. So you have to give some margin there, but let's benefit of the doubt assume that the 10 hours they claim is accurate. They're actually only working 10 hours in the business. Each of those 10 hours, they're going to be twice as efficient or 3 times as efficient as a normal human at that, because they built the process, they have the muscle memory, they care more than an employee will ever care. Yep. So whatever their hours are, you should multiply that times something to get what your replacement hours are going to need to be.
Absolutely. I mean, if for the future, I would say a minimum of 2x unless you know better for some reason.
Great, Matt. Well, we're getting toward the end here and want to bring in Kevin and pivot to our conversation about the searcher in residence, but still a few more things. First of all, let's just zoom out now and understand what Octal is today, what your vision for it is today, as you've basically done. You've built a small holding company. What's total revenue today of these 3 businesses?
Last year ended at just over 3 million.
Just over 3 million. Great. You teased what the vision of Octal, I guess, is now or was then, but kind of like, let's zoom out and how do you think about what you're building now in May 2025?
Sure. I'm still working on it a little bit, but it's starting to take better shape. So I've known we wanted to buy bigger in some way, whether that was on the side and putting an operator in place or growing Octal itself. Since we've brought Kevin on, who you're going to introduce, I believe, in a minute, it's made it clear what we are capable of here, because he has a lot of complementary skill sets to mine. We ended up we're doing the traction process here, and I should note that implementing traction has been a substantial win. So definitely a plug for that. But as we do it, it's been very clear that my strengths tend more towards the visionary, and Kevin is a very strong integrator. So we're piecing that together to see what we can grow out of this as a base, with our base being essentially the core values in traction and the operations and processes that we're building right now.
Are you thinking in terms of getting to a certain revenue number, a certain number of acquisitions, 8, or anything like that? Yeah,
there's a built-in 8 as a base. So I imagine if we get close to that, it'll sort of steer the direction. But I would say we haven't settled on a number, but let's say what feels natural and comfortable for us is somewhere in the range of 5x plus where we currently are.
5 times revenue so $15 million holding company, something like that.
I would say that looks to be the next stair step on the journey.
And when you contemplate other acquisitions or the direction of Octal or the direction of the portfolio of Octal, is it all sewing based manufacturing, or not necessarily? Because it does sound like that's where all three of your businesses are currently.
I think bolt-ons will be. So we're actively looking for bolt-on sewing businesses. So those would be smaller businesses that tend to sell for lower multiples, that we could, essentially rent another unit here and fulfill. So let's call it a 150 to 300 SDE kind of business. We would bolt on, and that would generally be a sewing related company. But I'm pretty sure we're going to branch beyond that very quickly. I would anticipate sometime over the next year, we'll be making that happen.
But it will be manufacturing, just not necessarily sewing, or not necessarily. It could be something else.
Not necessarily. I was trying to write down the way we look at this. So what we really enjoy is building a team and building a process for the long-term horizon. So that means that we're building something that is beneficial for our customers, for our employees, and for us. And we genuinely mean that. So I think our core set of strengths is going to be implementing that. And that doesn't have to be in manufacturing. That said, I am personally comfortable in it and I like it. So I would have a bit of a bias that direction. But if a good service business comes up, we could absolutely get that.
But it sounds like you actually did just articulate a particular vision.
Yes.
At least in the long-termism. Say more about that. What's that about?
So who was it? Permanent Equity. I think it was Brent Beshore. And then a little bit of, I think Chenmark is in that same type of vein. The long-term horizon has always been much more interesting to me than the short term. So
what do you like about it?
It lets you build something more genuine, I think. At least for me. I mean, everybody's a little different in their management style, but I want to build something where we genuinely are taking the employees' growth into account as we do it. And because if we build for the employees and for the customers and for us, we've got a operating base where everybody's trying to help us succeed. I don't believe that makes the most money year one or two. Your search funds are probably going to return slightly better results in the short term. But in the long term, when everybody's aligned, and that's the key word there, is aligned, everybody will help everybody succeed, or to a much higher level than when there's built-in conflict. So we're trying to build alignment and build something that has legs of its own and makes the employees and team want it to succeed for their own personal interest.
Mm-hmm. Because if there's a long-term vision for the company, there is a long-term opportunity for the employees to grow within an organization and to invest in and then be invested in turn by the business.
Yes. And during our quarterly meetings, we talk very openly now about where we're trying to go. And we have goals for the different business leads on where they are going to go. And eventually that's going to be goals for everybody below the business leads as well. It's already started. We've already started that process. And that sense of alignment that has been put in place partially with traction and partially just with the way the business was being built before has, I think, really set it up for a solid longer term success.
Great, Matt. And just before we turn to the search and residence concept, let's hear again about Rob's. So how has Rob's kind of gummed up the works a little bit? That might be too strong, but tell us, please.
Well, as we try to figure out the next larger jump, I just need to solve for how I could take a Rob's plan and then create a partnership. So it's really just the company structure. I'm going to have to find a Rob's lawyer expert, someone that knows this stuff and walk through it. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to move very quickly until we solve for that. And so it's a headache for me right now.
And for the audience who may or may not know exactly how Rob's works, basically your 401k is an equity holder, a significant equity holder in the business.
Correct. So
and so to free you totally to structure to create the future structure, you need to kind of get your 401k out of being an equity holder, and which probably amounts to buying your equity away from your 401k so that Matt alone is the equity holder.
Right, which is doable, but it puts me in a lower cash position,
Right,
which
right.
Isn't terrific.
Right. And of course, the rub here is that as you've built equity value in Octal, it becomes that much more expensive for you to buy your 401k out.
Yes. If I could go back, I would have taken on a minority investor with a little bit of cash and then just bought them out and made them solid returns, because it would now free me up to more easily think about building the business than the structural minutia that, frankly, I don't find very exciting.
But aside from whether or not the paperwork is interesting, which it's not, but it does seem like strategically there's a challenge here, because you got to now come up with the money to buy your 401k out, and so that comes out of your pocket, or.
Correct. I'm trying to solve for that right now. Actually, that's on my to-do for this summer, is to figure out how to solve for that. And it'll be probably a decent chunk of out of pocket, or potentially we can find a way to make it work if we find a large acquisition. There's some possibilities, but I do not know the answers right now. And that's why it is something like a penny in the gears, if you will.
Yeah. And just so for the listener, they need to be careful about this prospect. And just very on top of the fact that after they buy their business, they might look to buy out their 401k as soon as possible, because the longer that goes by, the more equity they build into the business, the harder it becomes to buy their 401k out.
Yep. The more successful you are, the more expensive it gets.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, just to be clear, when you do, or however you do, buy out your ROBs with that cash, call it whatever it is, some hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's not like that's going away. That's just now cash that's going to go into your 401k back for your own retirement. So it's not like it's somehow going away, or it's not like you're paying off a lender or something. But it's just cash that you can't now touch until you retire.
Correct. There is another way where I could sell additional shares or something along those lines to bring in a partner. But once again, just it's messier stuff that I'm going to have to solve for. And I'd rather I didn't have to.
This has been great, Matt. Anything more to say before we turn our attention to Searcher and Residence?
Cool. I think we've covered a lot of stuff. Do you want me to go through my notes?
Sure. If there's something there that we didn't get, let's get to it.
I think one thing that we found very beneficial is building out a company-wide dashboard. So where everybody clocks in now, we have built out our own ERM software, but it has the metrics for the entire business sitting in front of the employees. So they can see real-time productivity. They can see real-time forecasts for their quarterly bonuses, which are based directly on their productivity per hour. And that has made a substantial impact on overall productivity. And it's surprisingly actually helped morale as well, because people are able to see that, hey, we outproduced this week and it shows, and our bonus is going to be bigger.
Wow.
So we give them visibility to a lot. We give them visibility to sales. As soon as we build out the next portion of this, they're going to have visibility to volume of sales leads as well. So I want them to be able to see and be invested in start to finish of a sale process, and also to see how well they're doing and be able to measure them as a team. It doesn't show it for an individual. It's all by business unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is super beneficial.
Is that all traction? It sounds like a pillar of traction, or no?
It is a pillar of traction. We'd already started the process. So we started building out the ERM a little before we started traction, but it did play a role in how we built out the dashboard.
Fantastic, Matt. Now, before we bring Kevin on, tell us about what you were when you hired Kevin, or when you went out to look for somebody to fill the role that Kevin ultimately did. What was motivating you? What were you looking for? What were you trying to solve for?
I would say initially it was not so much with intentionality. I was looking to invest outside of the business as we grew, and I'd signed up for Searchfunder. And so I was looking to invest in some search funds, which I thought was a pretty cool model. And Kevin actually reached out to me. And when I found out that he was from St. Pete, a few things clicked. One, I personally never wanted to buy a business where someone else had control of the business. That didn't work for me. And that's your standard search fund model where you don't really have control. And I saw he was from St. Pete, and I threw out the idea sort of semi-seriously at the time, but hey, if you want, why don't you come on board? Because I knew that I could use something in the range of a part-time CFO or something along those lines. I was doing a lot at that point in time. It was a very flat structure with me on the top. And I said, well, come on board, and you could work here and run your search out of here and help me part-time, and I'd get to see what a fractional CFO is like and go from there. And
to be clear, Kevin had been on Searchfunder as a searcher. So you'd found him as somebody who was posting or whatever about wanting to buy business.
Correct. I'll let him say, but yeah, he was starting a search. He was in the process of building out a search fund, and I signed up to take part in that if he did it, but I left open to him coming here and working with us and running a self-funded search out of our shop. And he'll have to chime in after that. I want to say it was 2, 3, 4 months later that he ended up getting back to me.
But to be clear, Matt, you were looking for a CFO or a fractional CFO. It wasn't a sort of right-hand man. It was specifically financial.
It was
duties,
more specifically financial, but a little bit more than that. I knew that I was going to have to hire a highly skilled individual at some point to take on some of the portion of what I was doing. And I did not know exactly what that looked like, but it was pretty clear that he fit the bill for that.
Great. Okay. Well, let's bring him in. Kevin. Welcome, Kevin Pierre, to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Will, Matt.
Well, we're going to pick up the plot from where Matt just left us off here in a second, Kevin. But why don't you give us the background leading up to where you and Matt start talking on Searchfunder? Give us some of your background, please.
Sure. I'll try to be succinct. But I was originally from Pennsylvania, blue-collar family. Went to university, studied industrial engineering. From there, I started my first job in St. Pete. So I worked at a giant contract manufacturing company in a leadership development program. From there, did M&A integrations. So traveling around, not doing the financial aspects, but looking at the systems they use, the manufacturing process, and then making that acquisition on the shop floor, more from the system standpoint. But wanted to do something different, so decided to do an MBA. I went to ESA in Barcelona. This is where I first learned about search and ETA, but it was a bit too risky for me, actually, at the time. I don't even want to say risky. It just didn't seem like realistic, I would say. So I did 2 VC internships while during business school and loved that. So I got a little bit of exposure to investments, but wanted to actually build something. So I ended up joining another 2 startups afterwards, one in Slovakia and one in the UAE. But didn't really enjoy it. Didn't enjoy the UAE. And I saw then, this was about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years after graduating MBA, I started seeing some of my prior classmates making acquisitions from traditional search. And I thought, wow, this is something I really should start to actually look into. Fell in love with the idea. I read a number of different books, and then decided to talk to a bunch of classmates, talk to a bunch of investors, a bunch of searchers, those that were doing fundraising, those that acquired, listen to your podcasts, and then decided to give it a shot. So I first started in St. Pete, started doing some fundraising. I found Matt on Searchfunder, reached out to him. Didn't realize that at the time that there were, at least one other large name in St. Pete. But was deep in fundraising. And I had a girlfriend, just started dating somebody in St. Pete. My family's in St. Pete. I came home over the summer. I met with Matt just to give him updates on how fundraising was going. And he had on the table this part-time CFO. And I remember thinking, why am I going to try and go move to who knows where and do traditional search when at the time I'd lived in 7 countries outside of the US in 7 years. And I then said, I need to just stay in St. Pete and let me figure out how I can make this happen while still staying in the ETA space. So I convinced Matt to take me on. At the time, it was 4 days a week. So it was going to be part-time CFO, part-time hybrid, some other stuff. And we started off with that.
And Kevin, just to be clear, so you're from Pennsylvania, but since you had gone off to college and become an adult, your parents had moved down to St. Pete, and so that became basically your home base.
That's
and
correct.
You were dating somebody there, and so and so you go there, and so you've got a lot of reasons to stay there, and then that's where Matt is as well. Okay, great. So you guys kind of get the sense that it feels amorphous, like. Initially, it's going to be fractional CFO stuff, but you see that there could be more there. Matt, in Kevin, you see somebody who's entrepreneurial, is going to do his own search, likes the idea of search. So he's at the level. He understands
absolutely.
like what you're trying to build versus, I don't know, a GM you might find on Indeed. Nothing against such a person, but they might not. But Kevin shares your kind of worldview or your business view, right?
Yeah, at the risk of a pun, he was a peer. But in all seriousness, yeah. So we could discuss things at the higher level, which was really refreshing. I mean, we've got fantastic people here, but sometimes you want to be able to bounce ideas and have it come back strengthened, and we could do that, and that was very natural.
Yeah. Yeah, great. And so, Kevin, in working with Matt, you've told us some of the reasons, that you wanted to stay in St. Pete, but say more about why this opportunity working with Matt could be a good next step.
Yeah.
What did you see as the benefit to you?
Yeah, so Matt said it already partly through Traction. So he asked me to read the book, and of course I read it before I started. And actually, I want to say the first weekend that I was working, we were up at an event in Annapolis. We do this boat show every year. And on that weekend, after working with him just for a few days, I had already said, Matt, I think you fit perfectly into this visionary role, and I fit perfectly into this integrator role. And I think over the last 8 months, it's definitely panned out. But to speak to Matt's character, you've seen it already on this podcast of him truly caring about his employees. And I think that's actually something really special. He says that he has a really fantastic team, and largely in part, that's because he's fostered that. So just from the people element side, it's definitely an individual that I want to work with, and then also somebody that shares the same values and is a good fit for us to move forward in that dual role of visionary and integrator.
And so did you perceive it as being something you would do indefinitely, or was it a intermediate step on your original path to buy a business for yourself?
The original thought for both Matt and I was that I would join for about a year and I would get some more operating experience while I look for something to buy of my own. And then as this started to progress, I thought, wow, actually, why don't I consider this place as either becoming CEO, because I knew that this was something that Matt wanted to step away from, or what if I buy the business from Matt, or what if I lead some add-on acquisitions? Or what if I just continue in the business and then decide to actually go buy something of my own that's local if the right opportunity presents itself. So there was quite a few different directions that it could go, and I was happy with all of those directions.
Yeah.
And
And
I was oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, from my end, I was also okay with all of those. I mean, I'd initially looked to invest with Kevin. So if he ended up going and doing his own thing, I was there for it. And if he wanted to stay, well, I didn't know what to think of that. That actually ended up taking shape over time. But seeing how much he can get done made it really, really positive for him to stay and continue.
And those paths you described, Kevin, the possibilities that this relationship could take, were those all understood at the outset and made transparent? Were you guys talking openly about all those eventualities?
Yes. So
Okay.
I would think about something for maybe a week or two, and then I would bring it to Matt and say, Matt, what do you think about this? And he would be very forthcoming and transparent and say, I'm open to it. I like it. I don't like it. Here are my reservations. The communication was very open and transparent.
Mm-hmm. And Matt, what of this thing I heard Kevin say about him maybe becoming CEO? So were you, I didn't hear that from you earlier. So what was that possibility?
So that was not an initial discussion, but like I mentioned a little earlier, we just had our first baby, and it was a long 9 months. There were some complications, and I was exhausted, frankly. So when it came up during that time period, the idea of him possibly being CEO was broached, and it clicks. It makes sense. I don't know if that's exactly the direction we're going to take, but he absolutely could do it and do a fantastic job of it. So I've been working pretty hard for 20-ish years now since
Mm-hmm.
college, and I'm okay with taking a few months off at some point. Maybe I do have it in my next few years to take a 3 to 6 month break, and
Mm-hmm.
Kevin could definitely help with that. So it made sense, and it's absolutely something that could be happening.
Well, so this is all pretext I want to be providing the audience. The three of us actually met in person in St. Pete. I was down there for the partners meeting, the Minds Capital partners meeting. Nicholas, my partner in Minds Capital, is based there, and he got us all together. And the three of us were talking about this, and Kevin, your role, a lot of what the audience has just heard. And as we kind of talked, we realized that this was a pattern. And in fact, it's a pattern that informs SmithList, the SmithList.com, the site that I launched to help searcher owners find operators from the ETA community. So entrepreneurial operators, something kind of peers, like you said, Matt, that you might not be able to find in a GM off Indeed. And so anyway, we realize that there's a pattern here where you get where the person who bought the business wants a peer, somebody like-minded, and where better to find somebody like that than the searcher ecosystem. And all of the different kind of ways that relationship could evolve and the possibilities there, like we've already been touching on. And so we agreed that we would talk about this on the podcast. And we also agreed that this thing should have a name. And Kevin, you went off, and I think it was your name that you came up with, and came back with Searcher in Residence, which you've already heard me use 5 times because I'm super enthusiastic about the label that you've come up with. It's such a good concept to capture this very kind of amorphous thing that could go in a lot of different directions, but I think that there's an essence there that we all understand and that needs a name. And you not only came up with this label, but you kind of codified it into well, really a Notion doc, which let's look at, and we'll provide a link to this for the audience to have. But why don't you just kind of, from here on out, why don't you just walk us through how you've codified this searcher in residence concept?
Sure. Yeah, so this is something that Matt and I fell into, I would say, pretty naturally. And as we were seeing it pan out, we thought this is really a model that could actually be quite beneficial to the broader ETA community. So I view it as a different way to pursue ETA. So it's taking in somebody who is interested in doing a search for 1 to 2 years to get operational experience, but then to have a number of different outcomes, all of which beneficial, that it could take. So one is they do what they normally would have expected anyway. They just then have better operating experience. So they go off and buy their own business. They work in the embedded small business for 1 to 2 years, and then they offer the president, the business owner of that company that they were working with, an investment opportunity to invest in them as they go buy something of their own. That's one option. Mm-hmm. Another option is they step in as CEO and they allow the previous CEO to go pursue other things. So if it's a CEO that just wants a break, or if the CEO wants to pursue new ventures, new products, or just take a different role perhaps in the company, this then offers that. That's the second option. The third option is that they buy out the owner. So this could be an owner that says, I want to retire in the next few years, which I think there are a lot of these out there right now. But they want to make sure that their legacy is preserved, that their employees are taken care of. They don't want a transactional, traditional searcher to come to them with a spreadsheet and say, hey, I want to buy your business. I don't know anything about it. They feel more comfortable selling to somebody that they've actually worked with for the last 1 to 2 years.
And by the way,
jump in on that point.
Please, Matt. And then I also want to go ahead.
What I would say is that there's a lot of validity to that. Was point 3, right, Kevin?
Yes.
One of the most important things before I would believe that Kevin could be the CEO here or purchase is to see how well he respects and is respected by the people here. And seeing that makes it so much easier to envision it being a healthy transition should that ever happen.
And what I was going to say is that one, if you're hearing that, you might think that seems like the least likely path of all of these, that you're going to bring in a searcher in residence and that they maybe buy the business from you. But in fact, on SmithList, I've seen multiple instances where an owner, a searcher owner, is looking for a GM-ish type role or a director of, the ops person. And they'll say, and this person might, if it works out, maybe we sell the business to this person. So it's not at all crazy. In fact, it's a pattern that's already emerged. So just want to share the market evidence that this could really be a viable path.
Yeah, I think for business owners that money isn't the number one thing, and they care about their legacy and the future of their employees, this is something that's quite valid.
Very.
And in theory, I mean, we haven't proven it out, but in theory, it could lead to better terms with banks as well. I mean, if the bank understands, hey, this person's been working in this company for the last 1 to 2 years in a key management role, then that could very well be true. Option 4 would be to lead add-on acquisitions to scale into a holdco. So that's something that could be relevant in our business here. Or the last one, which is also very relevant, is realizing that SMB ownership isn't the right fit prior to actually diving deep into it, taking in millions of investor capital or debt. This is very, very possible. I don't know the metrics, but certainly this has to be happening. And this is basically a way to get your feet wet prior to taking on this massive commitment.
Well, and that one, so I try to share the negative aspects of ETA, the horror stories, the fetal position moments on acquired minds. And I've happily gotten a lot of guests to come and share those stories to their credit. But one thing I have not yet had somebody come and say is, I just didn't like small business. And we know that is a reaction, because small business has a very distinct character, especially if you're coming from corporate land. So that is one of the probably biggest risks of all in search that gets no attention, including on this podcast, that buyer searcher just doesn't like what they've gotten themselves into, doesn't like small business. So valuable to learn in advance.
It's a different beast. Running a small business, you have a bunch of different shaped pieces and you have to make them all fit somehow to the benefit of those pieces, the employees and the company. Whereas where you find, Kevin's worked in probably larger corporations than I have. I was very field based, but I get the impression it's very much more, you say you all have to be this cube and fit exactly where I tell you to. And that's a very, very different concept on how you manage a team.
Yeah.
Kevin, am I in the right ballpark on that?
Yeah, I would say so.
Great. We'll keep walking us through this document here, Kevin.
Sure. So during the 1 to 2 years, the searcher in residence, or the SIR, or the SIR, I suppose, we can say however we want. I mean, we're making up the term. Can be either full-time, part-time. If they are part-time, they can potentially run the search in parallel. And they need to...
Their own search. They could run
Correct.
their own search in parallel.
They could run their own search in parallel. And some potential roles could be director of growth. That's what I started as. We called it director of growth and improvements. And I was basically running special projects and trying to increase revenue, decrease costs, make things just better in general, get to stuff that Matt hasn't been able to get to in years. Now that, there's another individual that has the ability to put attention towards stuff like that.
If I could jump in on that point, hugely beneficial. I had a list of things I've wanted to do for a long time, just been limited by myself. And Kevin's been able to, 3x the speed at which we get through what I would call special projects or improvements. Made a massive difference in improving those things.
Yeah, I love that. Sure.
Or general manager, vice president, head of sales, CFO, sales marketing advisor. I will say that if they become a role that is quite critical to day-to-day operations, then part of their role then needs to also be either making themselves redundant or finding their replacement. I mean, this is something that is crucial if they were to then step out, right? They can't leave the business in need of a critical role if they go and find a business that they want to acquire.
Well, and that just deserves underlining that this is a 1 to 2 year role. So whatever happens on the other side of that, indeed, even if you became the CEO of this business, you would still be then elevating into CEO, and whatever you left in your wake would need to be filled. So this is a transient, medium term, 1 to 2 years, but a transient thing. It's not a perpetual thing. Yep. And that also goes to just the special projects thing, Matt, that you were saying, because I find this in my own business with special projects. It's hard because you can't hire a permanent person to do a special project, because a special project is by nature a short-term thing.
Yep.
And so you just kind of naturally take it upon yourself, but you're too busy to ever do it. So special project remains undone. I guess one question in this, what's that, Matt?
They pile up on you, and you might be able to pick off one a year that you can do as when you're in my role wearing a bunch of hats running the company. And we're going to see the benefit probably in 6 to 12 months of the things that we've undertaken, but it's going to happen.
Great.
I do think that this model is better suited for searchers that want to stay local. And I would almost underline that twice, of if you want to stay local and you're thinking traditional search isn't something for me, I think this is a very good alternative, because it helps you build relationships in the community. And if you want to buy something and stay local, then building relationships in the community is number one thing to do. And I've definitely seen that for myself over the last 8 months. I moved back in September, started in October. So it improves the odds of a successful acquisition, I would say, and as well the long-term operational success of the company that you're working in as well, because you get to leverage those relationships.
Yeah, fantastic.
I view this really as a win-win for both sides. So for the business owner that, again, cares about their employees and their legacy, it's a smooth, thoughtful exit, or at the very least, an investment opportunity with somebody that they actually know. And for the search,
a smooth, thoughtful exit if they sell the business to the searcher in residence.
Yeah, so I guess it could be more than what I've written. It's a smooth, thoughtful exit if they sell the business. It's a smooth, thoughtful change of position if they move out of their CEO role. It could be an investment opportunity. There are win-win. There are win scenarios in all of these, except for, I guess, suppose number 5. But even in number 5, where they realize that the ownership isn't the right fit, even in this scenario, they would have hired somebody to take on projects and to bring value for at least a short period of time.
Yeah.
And for the searcher in residence, it's then the hands-on experience, credibility, and a path to ownership.
Yeah.
And again, I said this earlier, but why this model I think matters now even more than a few years ago is because obviously everyone knows in ETA that the baby boomers are retiring in record numbers.
And Kevin, so wait, to be clear, actually, I was thinking about the searcher in residence as the owner, Matt, being a former searcher or an ETA, a product of the ETA community. But in fact, it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It could be just a boomer owner who brings on a searcher in residence.
It would be, if I could, it would be super beneficial for them too. This was clearer for me because I see the value in ETA, and I mean, since I bought, I've had 2 or 3 friends now buy businesses. I've got another family member about to, and I've encouraged people here in the company to, if they feel that if it's a fit for them, to go buy their own business, and I'll invest in them. So I came from the point where that was something I was trying to support already. So it was clear. But some boomers, like imagine you've got let's call it a 62-year-old guy, the seller of this business, but let's call it a $5 million or $10 million business. If they'd have brought Kevin in for a year or 2 before they sold, the business would end up selling for a lot more than they ever spent.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point.
Yeah. Well, I think I was emphasizing the business owners that are looking to retire, but absolutely, it's definitely applicable to those that did a search and want to grow. Say they're at, I don't know, year 4 of operating the business and they wanted to sell as soon as possible, or they saw growth opportunities in the next 1 to 2 years, and they bring in a searcher in residence to help them make that growth, but then sell to the searcher in residence. I mean, this is also a possibility.
Yeah.
The only caveat there, and I can talk about this later in the trade-offs, is that when committing to selling to your searcher in residence, then you potentially don't bring the deal to market. So you are limiting the amount of offers that you would potentially see. And this could then mean a lower financial exit.
I would argue that could be, in every sale, there's gray area because the seller doesn't know what to believe of the buyer and the buyer doesn't know what to believe of the seller. And when you've been embedded like that, that gray area starts to erase. So some of the downside is eroded away simply by it being a more trusted transaction.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting point. You know, Matt, you brought up Chenmark earlier, and I'm also reminded of their, I think it's generalist vice president, GVP program. But essentially, Chenmark, building a holdco, buying new businesses all the time, are always trying to build out their bench of talent to have operators and people come in to run these businesses that they're acquiring. People like you, people like searchers. And so they're often at the ETA conferences talking about Chenmark precisely to bring in talent into the Chenmark family. I say this only to say that there's a parallel here. For them, they've kind of institutionalized this searcher in residence thing, and they're definitely trying to bring what we're calling searcher in residences into the Chenmark family to keep them and have them run businesses, Chenmark businesses. But still, it's kind of it's a similar feel.
It's very similar. It's just maybe more flexible. And I'm okay with any of these outcomes, really.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely correct. What Matt said on flexibility. I think Chenmark has a fantastic thing going on. I think that their model is mostly the second outcome here. I think the GVPs move into the CEO role. I don't know if they get any sort of ownership opportunities. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, there's a company-wide ownership and equity grants at Chenmark, so they get ownership that way. But no, they are not looking to then buy and become owner of a Chenmark acquired business. So you're right. Theirs is a bench to be is a pathway to become a CEO within the Chenmark family, which is just one of the outcomes here. But I feel like in Chenmark, for somebody who said, "Oh, I just want to work at Chenmark for a couple of years and then quit and go do my search," that would probably disqualify that candidate. They don't want somebody like that. Whereas the SIR concept is that everybody's fine with that and understands that that's a possible outcome.
Funny enough, one of Chenmark bought one of our customers, or two. I think two of them in the last year.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, I know they bought some boat businesses, but they're like touring the boat tours. In fact, I featured one 3 years ago. It can't have been one of those because there's nothing catamaran about it.
Okay, I don't think I've heard of them. That it was actually in a different space. I just thought it was pretty funny when we saw this. Oh. We saw a new owner and checked into it. I was like, "Oh, that's Chenmark." I don't know them, cool. But I sort of know them.
Yeah, I don't know what that acquisition would have been. All right, so trade-offs. So this all sounds great in theory, but I'll just spoiler one of these is somebody like you, Kevin. The reason why you're hard to find is because you come expensive. And so how is that addressed here? Maybe you're, well, I won't put words in your mouth.
Sure. That is definitely a trade-off. My current compensation is below the average of a post MBA grad. That being said, I wouldn't say it's too far off of what I would be paying myself in a traditional search. So you might be able to consider it as an investment by taking this smaller compensation for a short period of time to then go into this position where any of these outcomes then significantly should increase the salary as well as the large exit potential.
Great. So you're willing to take a below market salary, not terribly below market, understanding that it's an investment of a couple of years, which will result in getting that back. And then Matt, you're able to access this peer talent for at a rate that you wouldn't otherwise be able to access because it is this kind of searcher and residence model.
It partially that, and partially it allowed essentially a trial hire of a very high quality individual to see what that type of individual could do in the business. And I'm super happy with how it's going.
Great. Other trade-offs, Kevin?
Yeah, I've listed quite a few because I wanted to be as transparent as I could be. But it's maybe the number one that I see here for the searcher in residence is that there's a large relationship risk. So you could go 1 to 2 years, everything's going great, you're having fantastic growth. The expectation is that maybe you're going to buy out the owner and then something happens in the relationship, you have an argument, and then the whole year and a half is down the drain. So this is definitely a risk. You need to manage the relationship well, because if it does break down, it can derail the opportunity entirely.
Sure. Okay, fair enough. Others? You want to just bang through these trade-offs for us?
Sure. Yeah. So compensation we talked about could be below market. There is no guarantee of ownership or equity after 1 to 2 years. The time spent embedded can reduce your exposure to other deals. So if you really are looking to buy something, then this could distract from that.
Yeah.
The path to ownership could then also take longer than traditional ETA timelines. the business success. So you spend time growing the company. This could reduce the owner's urgency to sell, right? So if you double the company in 2 years and it's going really well, then maybe the owner says, wow, this is great. Why do I actually want to sell at this time? And then that leads into the potential changing of the business owner's minds as well. That's another risk. There is one that I haven't really experienced too much, but your role could sit awkwardly between both being an employee and the owner, and this could then create tension. And you could then, of course, spend years driving growth only to misalign on terms and watch the deal actually go to market. Spending a lot of your effort and then seeing it disappear. So all of this was for the searcher in residence. For the business owner, I can have Matt chime in for any of these.
Before we get to those, just to be clear, I think that there's kind of the searcher and residence concept where searcher and residence is a potential buyer of the business, and then searcher and residence where they're not likely to buy the business. And I think that's important to highlight, because many of your risks that you highlighted here, Kevin, were related to that. If the searcher and residence was possibly going to buy that business. But if it's more of all of the other reasons to do it, the getting exposure to SMB, embedding themselves in the local community, building their chops, developing a relationship with the owner who then might invest in them for their search later, all of those other great benefits still are still there.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want the listeners to feel too much like this. It's only a searcher in residence if it's an interview to be the future buyer of that business. Not necessarily at all.
Right. And
right?
maybe
or was that a big part of it?
I think you're totally right, Will. And something to emphasize here is that this is a model with multiple different outcomes, and it's really expected to be dynamic. And the searcher in residence and the business owner should go into this relationship understanding that it can go into a number of different directions, and they could be happy with multiple of those directions.
Transparency is critical for that.
Yeah.
On both sides.
Yeah. Excellent point. Because we're despite the fact that we've codified this into this Notion doc, it's actually, this is meant to be this pretty flexible multiple paths thing. It's not meant to be overly prescribed here. So thank you. Okay, let's start wrapping up here. Just the last little piece is what are the trade-offs to the business owner in the search and residence concept?
I'll take that one. Early on, there's you have a short-term window of 1 to 2 years, and the first 1 to 2 months could be spent really getting acquainted with the business on the searcher's part. If you're looking if you're looking to sell to the searcher, it could take a year or two. It's going to be a slower process than, actually thinking about that out loud, it's probably going to take you at least a year if you go to market. So it's probably not that big a difference realistically, maybe slightly slower. Letting go of control. That's a thing I'm working on every day. It's been made a lot easier, and it's an exercise that I needed to go through at some point in time. But letting go of control as the owner to the searcher in residence is, it can be different for an owner that's done everything. The culture fit is critical, much more important than really probably anything else, because without a culture fit, nothing is going to work. I think there's 3 more here. Let's see.
Yeah.
So, there's the potential that the searcher in residence doesn't want to, if you're wanting to sell them, doesn't want to buy your business, which actually isn't that bad as long as they help out and do some special projects along the way. And there's absolutely the thing where you could miss out on selling to, let's say, the market with potentially a bit higher multiple. That one doesn't talk to me very much because I've I'm not in this purely financially, and I really find value in what we do. And who I sell to is going to be very important. And then the whole fit with the employees is something, it's a personality thing that has to be navigated very deftly. So it requires some emotional intelligence by both people involved.
And by the way, how do you position this person to the employees? I guess it depends on what their primary role is. You just kind of give them the title of where they'll primarily be spending time. So fractional CFO, for example.
That works. I mean, the title that what was the title we gave you again, Kevin? Director
of Growth and Improvements.
So that's a great one because everything he does is a special project and everything fits under it, right? So he has touch points in every part of the business from there.
Yeah. Fascinating, guys. I love it. I think this concept has legs. As you know, I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about this term that you've come up with, searcher in residence. It's perfect. Of course, it's, for those who don't know, it's based on the entrepreneur in residence concept, popular in tech land, that I guess usually happens at VC firms, right? A VC will have an entrepreneur, an EIR. Yeah. So anything more to add to the story, Matt, or Kevin, your role in the story, or the searcher in residence, or have we gotten to everything? We're well over time. So
yeah, I think we've hit quite a bit.
This has been fantastic, guys. Matt, thank you for so much transparency on Octal and the businesses you bought under it. Kevin, thank you for putting work into this document and really putting your thoughts to paper and this kind of like this squishy concept and kind of codifying it. And of course, the name. Is there anything that you guys are looking for or want to request from the audience or otherwise?
Sure. So first, if people want to reach out to me and talk about what it's like to buy a small business, I'm glad to help. They can reach me on LinkedIn. For us as Octal, we're actively looking for deals in the Tampa Bay region. And then in the wider market in bolt-on sewing companies from around the country that we could move here.
Kevin, LinkedIn, best place to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a good place to reach me. If anyone wants to talk on my experience in the searcher in residence, I'm happy to chat. It's not something that is perfect. It's something that we just tried to put legs to because we thought that it might be valuable to the broader ETA space.
I agree. Thank you for doing it. Matt Brunnig, Kevin Peer, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. Really appreciate it.
Will.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. Don't forget to subscribe to the Acquiring Minds newsletter. We send an email for every episode with an introduction to the interview, a link to the video version on YouTube, and soon, key takeaways, numbers, and more essentials from the interview for those of you who don't have time to listen or watch it. Subscribe at acquiringminds.co. You'll also find all our webinars there on the website, both those we have coming up and recordings of past webinars. At this point, there are over 30 webinar recordings, a wealth of information on all the technical nitty-gritty of buying a business. acquiringminds.co.